Hi, this is Jesse Liberty from jesseliberty.com, and this module is working with classes. One of the key elements in a class are properties. Properties come in four flavors: full properties, automatic properties, and then we have get-only or read-only properties, and finally read-only with initialization. Let's take a look at each of these in turn. Full properties have a backing variable, in this case the lowercase name, and then they have the property name, and typically they have a getter and a setter where the getter returns the backing variable and the setter sets the backing variable to whatever value is passed in. So if I were to say name equal Jesse Liberty, Jesse Liberty would be the value, and that would be assigned to the backing variable. This pattern is extremely common. You can vary it and have a more complex getter or setter, but as it's shown here, it is so common that C# provides a shorthand known as an automatic property. This is what we've seen so far. Here we have just the property name and the getter and the setter, but it creates exactly the same code as the full property we saw earlier. There are times when you're using an automatic property, but you don't want to have a setter. In that case, you would use a read-only property. It's exactly like an automatic property, except it only has a get. This can present a problem, however, because you might want name to have an initial value, and so you have, in this case, a getter with initialization. It is possible to give two methods the same name. This is called method overloading. The way the compiler knows which method you mean is that the two methods must either differ in the number of parameters or they must differ in the type of parameters. If we look at the first compute salary, it takes a double. The second takes two doubles, that is a difference in the number of parameters. And the third takes a double and string. That has the same number of parameters as the one above, but it has different types. This can make coding much easier. Rather than having compute salary double, compute salary string, we can call them all compute salary. The job of a constructor is to create your object and to initialize your object to its starting state. Here we have a worker class, and the method worker is the constructor. You can tell it's a constructor because it has no return value, not even null. It has the same name as the class. Constructors may or may not take parameters, and you can assign those parameter values to fields or properties or use them in any way you like. It is a method, but a special method called the constructor. The default constructor is just like any other constructor, but it has no parameters. That is, this is a special name for constructors with no parameters, called the default constructor. This name causes a lot of confusion. If you do not provide any constructors in your class, then a default constructor is provided for you. It's easy to believe it's called a default constructor because you get it by default, but that is not true. A default constructor is any constructor with no parameters, whether it's provided for you or you write it yourself. Here we have a default constructor that is provided by the compiler, not by the author, and so it's implicit. You don't actually see the constructor. But because you have that implicit default constructor, you can instantiate a worker by saying new worker paren with no parameters, and that will call the implicit default constructor. If you do create constructors, even one, and you want a default constructor, then you have to explicitly create it. In this class of worker, we've created a constructor that takes two parameters, but we don't have a default constructor. Therefore, writing this will not work because it's attempting to call a default constructor and there isn't one. Remember, you don't get the implicit default constructor if you've created a constructor yourself. You can fix this by simply adding your own explicit default constructor. That is, adding a second constructor that takes no parameters. And this is overloading the constructor just as you overloaded other methods. Let's take a look at a demonstration of adding constructors.